Hey, so this is a bit of a departure because this is the first time I'm making a tutorial about Blender. The reason I'm doing this is because I have been disappointed because I haven't really seen a good video tutorial series that introduces Blender for game developers, for people who are going into the software, who are knowing that they're just going to export whatever they create in Blender to a game engine like Unity or Unreal. And I'm doing this a little unscripted. I have bullet points on the other monitor, but I wanted to get some feedback first before I write a really comprehensive tutorial. So what I'm going to cover in this first video is modeling, and then in the next video, I'm going to cover UVs, textures, and materials. So this one's just going to be getting familiar with the interface, well, downloading Blender first, of course, getting familiar with the interface, and then modeling just a little bit. Right here, you can just go to blender.org.download, link in the description as always, and you can download Blender 3.5. Now, I know a lot of my audience is coming from making stuff for VR chat, and in that case, you might want an add-on called the Cat's Blender plugin. What this does is makes it far easier to create 3D models, specifically humanoid 3D models. So if that's the case, if you look at here under releases, you can see that it's fully compatible with Blender 2.93. That means that it's not fully compatible with any of the later versions of Blender, so 3 and onward. There might be like some bugs and things. I've encountered some bugs. So you can either download that version 2.93 LTS from here, or see it's an LTS. That means it's still getting updates until June of this year. If you want to still keep getting those updates, you can also download this on Steam, and then you can just switch it to the LTS branch, and then you'll keep getting updates for that without having to, download it and reinstall it again. But for everyone else, just download this version. It's the version I'm going to be using, and I actually have it right here. And because I'm hoping I'm going to build a new computer next week, so I can just install it, accept, next, install. And I'm doing this partially because I want to show you what happens when you first start up this software. You're going to get some prompts that ask you to do things, and I've configured mine a little differently. So I want to make sure that you're seeing the same things on my screen that you're going to see on your screen. That's why I'm doing a fresh install. And also because I am going to show you how to download this extension, which I'm going to use as well, which is essentially going to show you all the different keystrokes that I'm using. What's really big about Blender is that there's so many hotkeys, and it's really important to know what the keys I'm pressing are. So this way, you're going to see all those keys. It's done for me, so now I can open the software, and you're going to see a pop-up screen here, language, English, shortcuts, Blender. If you're coming from a software like Maya, you can choose that, and then that will give you shortcuts that are corresponding to what you typically find in industry software. Select with left. The old one is select with right, which everyone hated. Spacebar, that's interesting. It's usually meant for play, and what it'll do is, this is if you're working with animations. I'm assuming most of you are not going to be doing that. So instead, you can set this to search, and then that way, when you press the space bar, you can search for any command in Blender. I'm going to show you that just in a minute there. So this is the default scene. And as you can see here, there's a bunch of windows here and stuff. And just like any other software, you can drag these windows around how you please. Now remember how I said you're probably not going to be using animations? Well, you can combine certain windows into other ones. Now it's a bit tricky with this one, because with this, it's really easy to, as you can see here, if I uncheck that, then that means it just goes into this area up top here. We'll just merge into that bottom area down there. But otherwise, if you scroll it up a bit, I can never do it right. But you can also right click, and then you can split to create more areas, or you can join the areas that way. So it's a more precise way of doing that. And now we just have a focus on this 3D viewport. First, I want to go to the preferences to install that add-on. And here is the add-on window. Now I'm actually going to have to show you all, you guys should just, I'll do this again, but Node Wrangler is going to be useful for the next episode. I'll bring that up in the next episode. But you can also to install any other add-on. It's usually going to come in a .py file or a .zip file. It's in my downloads folder, and screencast keys comes in a zip folder. The cats plugin also comes in a zip folder, so it's installed the same way. You say install add-on, you look at here, and boom, there we go. We have the add-on, and then the add-on will appear in this side window here. And you can, it's N is the key, and now you can see the shortcuts I'm using. Great. So you can press N to hide that, and you can see that I am using the middle mouse button. That's the one that you're going to use the most to navigate the scene. So the middle mouse button, if you click it, you will orbit around the scene. Now, if you hold, and if you scroll up and down, that of course zooms. And if you hold shift, and then use the mouse button, you'll pan. So just getting used to that, you can get used to navigating the scene. Let's say we want to orbit around this object again. Well, you could just try and go back to it, but it won't be exact, and that's just very time consuming. So instead, you can press numpad period, and that will focus on whatever object you have. If you want to, whatever object you have selected, which is whatever is highlighted. If you want to focus on all the objects in the scene at once, you can press the home key. And if you ever forget any of these, there's all these menus up here that honestly, if you're going to take away one thing from this video, it's that exploring these menus will help you learn Blender probably better than anything else, because it will just help you get familiar with all of the different many features that this software offers. And you see here, frame selected, and it actually shows you what that shortcut is. So it's very important to memorize these hotkeys and shortcuts, because they will make you very fast and productive at using this software. And so here you see we can click on these other objects and we can just orbit around them. And we can also select multiple objects. If you hold shift, just like in Unity, it selects multiple objects. And this is the active selected, the one that's highlighted in a yellowish orange, and then the one that's highlighted in orange are previous ones that are selected. There are some of the options that will just do things to the active selected, so it's very important to know and distinguish that. And also, if you're familiar with game engine software like Unity, there's a hierarchy over here. But unlike Unity, you can't order them in whatever order you want. They're just stuck in alphabetical order under each collection. You can create different collections, which are like folders, which is really nice, and I really wish Unity had that. There's also a way to move around like in Unreal or Unity, and that's with Shift and then the tilde key. And that's basically, it's called walking, because you can enable gravity. If you look at the bottom row right here, you press Shift and then tilde. Remember, that's the key under Escape. And you can see that if you hold Shift, that makes you go fast. And if you hold Alt, that makes you go slow. And then you can press Tab to toggle gravity. Of course, wait a sec. Yeah, so now I'm standing on top of the cube, and you can press V to jump. But yeah, so this is like doing no clip in like a Source Engine game or whatever. And then right click is cancel, but then left click is confirm. And just like in Unity, everything has a transform, so an X, Y, and Z rotation, and there are these handy gizmos right here, just like in Unity, and move it on the X-axis, the Y-axis, and the Z-axis. Now, a note, unlike Unity, the coordinate system for Blender has the Z-axis as the vertical axis and the Y-axis representing width instead of height as it does in Unity. So you can also use the hotkey G. The hotkey G stands for grab, it'll be relative to the camera at first, or you can press X, Y, or Z to lock it to that respective axis. It's very, very helpful. As you can see on the bottom there, it shows you all the other shortcuts you have when you do an action like that. So if I want to move it on every axis except the x-axis, I can press Shift X, and then I can move it in 2 axes, but not all 3. And if I want, let's do the same thing with Y and Z. As you can see, Z is like you're moving it on the floor. And I can also hold Control to move it incrementally, or Shift to move it more slowly. Very, very helpful. And just like any other software, you can use Control Z to revert it, all the actions that you've done. Here's another interesting thing, is you can do Control Alt Z. Oh, I don't have it enabled. That's another thing up here. It's called Undo History, which you can go install for yourself, but that's very useful. The other things that you can do is you can rotate it, just like in Unity or Unreal. Do rotate it all at once or on individual axes. And you can also press, just like there's the G key for grabbing it, there's the R key for rotating it. Again, you can lock it to the respective axes. And again, you can move it incrementally or slowly. And there's also scaling. Scale, scale. S is for scaling. Again, X, Y, Z. So just playing around with those is really, 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 really important to just understand, all the things you can do with just the very basic transforms for just very basic objects. Control Z to reset it back to the cube that it was. And then I can select that. I can also, remember, select multiple things, and I can move them around just the same. Darn. Okay, and I can rotate them. I can also, there's also these different coordinate systems, so sometimes you don't want the global transform, just like in Unity, there's local, but then there's all these other options which can be helpful in different scenarios, but that goes beyond the scope of this video. And you can also select all the things in the scene at once by pressing A, and you can deselect them all at once by pressing Alt-A. You can also hide objects, and again, the hotkey is H for hide, and then Shift-H is hide everything except the thing that is selected, and then Alt-H is unhide everything. Remember, that's H to hide selected, Alt-H to unhide everything, Shift-H to hide everything but what's selected, and then Alt-H to unhide everything. Okay, so I accidentally pressed Shift-A before, and this is how you can add objects. And so as you can see here, all of these little different menu items have a highlighted letter, and that means that I can press that letter M in Mesh's case, and then all these other options here have a different letter that is highlighted. So I want to add in a cylinder, so that's Y, and I've just added a cylinder. Now I want to put it on top of this cube here. So I can move it like that, or I can do G, Z, and then move it up, but hold Control to move it incrementally, so it is exactly the numpad period to focus on this new object that I've just created. This object right here is a primitive. All of these objects under meshes are called primitive. With these simple primitive objects, you can model just about any 3D object imaginable. We typically want these spheres to be smooth around there, and this is clearly not smooth. So how do we fix that? Well, if you right-click Shade Smooth, okay, that doesn't look quite correct though, because it's smoothing also across up there, which we don't want. We only want it smooth around there. So if we do shade auto smooth, now you can see that it's smooth around here, but it's not smooth going up to the top. And if you click this, you can see that there's often these little menus that pop up when you're doing an action, and these can give you different ways to modify that said action. So as you can see, this auto smoothing is controlled by the angle at which these different polygons go into one another, right? So these are at an angle that is about like 13 degrees, 10 degrees maybe, but this is 90 degrees. So if we do 90 degrees, then you can see that it was smooth, but anything less than that, and it's not. Just keep it at the default of 30. And if I add in a sphere, a UV sphere specifically, you can see that there are extra options here. So I can make it have more polygons, but I'll just keep it at the default, which is pretty reasonable, I think. So I will now go to shade this smooth, and we can shade it smooth and not auto smooth because it's, well, completely smooth all around and there are no hard edges. So it's actually really interesting because if you either shade smooth or just shade flat, it doesn't have to have any extra data. If you shade auto smooth, it then has to put in extra data for every vertex here, and that increases the size of the storage that's needed for the 3D model. Just an interesting fact. Now that I'm done with that, I just wanted to remind you that you can press the space key or the F3 key to search for any command that we might want to do. So for example, for this one, you can, if you forgot how to add in a cone, you just search for adding in a cone or adding in any shape, doing any action that you're allowed to do for anything that you have selected, essentially. Okay, so with that out of the way, we can now get into actually editing these, creating 3D models. First thing, just like as the properties window for Unity has all the different properties, we have properties for the transform here under this yellow box. And so I'm just going to set that back to 0. It goes back to the default. Okay, and then now I'm going to go into edit mode, and that's simply by pressing the tab key. And in this mode, instead of selecting individual objects, we only get to use the object that is selected, or edit the object that is selected. And as you might already know, every 3D model is made up of vertices, which is the individual points, edges, which are, well, the edges, and faces, which are connected by the vertices and edges. And just like the individual objects themselves, each one of these can be moved or rotated or scaled and constrained on any of the axes. It's very useful to just, demonstrate each of these and try them out for yourself. And again, you can use the hotkeys as well. So I want to do something more special to this. I want to create like a little bit of an arc. And there's actually a good way to do that. So it is simply, it's called an extrusion. This is the first hotkey we have here. So you can click it and then extrude like that. As you can see, it created new polygons from the one that we had. So it created 5 new faces. Look around. And also, you can select the same way, selected different objects. So you can press A to select all the faces. You can press Shift to select multiple faces. Or what's really interesting, you can do the same thing for vertices and edges. And say you want to select all of these vertices align, well, instead of having to Shift select that one and that one, you simply shift select, click that one, and hold control and then select the one at the end of the path, and Blender will automatically pick the shortest path between all of those points. Very, very useful. One of the things that's very frustrating to see is when people select very inefficiently, and I'm going to teach a couple more selection tips and tricks. But if you want to learn any of them for yourself, what's easiest to do is just to go up into these, again, explore these menus. You just go up into the selection menu. If you have a more intricate selection that you need to make, rather than individually selecting each face, there might be an option that's more tailor-made for the thing that you are trying to select, the region that you're trying to select. So I'm going to do one more. Actually, I'm going to rotate this on the y-axis, and I'm going to extrude it one more time. I'm going to scale it down a little bit, and I'm going to rotate it again, y-axis. And now I want to make this shape a little bit more interesting. So I want to make like intrusions on, as you can see the different keys that I had to press to select the faces that I did in the most efficient way possible. Let's click this one and then control to select these two, and then shift click that one so I don't lose the ones on these side that are selected. And then I can control click to fill in these two, and it will pick the shortest path from the last one, the last face that was actively selected. So it won't fill in any of the spaces between these, because as you remember, I clicked this one and then this one. But if I control click from this face, then it will only fill in between this face and the next face I click, which next clicked this face, so this face was filled in. To make an intrusion, it's like making an extrusion, but without dragging it out any. So I can press the I key, and now you can see that I have new faces inside of the faces that I had before. And so I want to kind of like extrude into the thing a little bit, right? But as you can see, now I've extruded this one out where I want this side to also be intruded. And one of the things I could do is I could scale this, I could extrude and then scale only on the y-axis. Or there's a better way to do this, and it's called extrude along normals. And what that will do is it will extrude perpendicular to the angle of the polygons. That makes sense, as you can see here. Now, remember where we could add objects, and also I'm going to shade auto smooth that smooths the parts that I want to, this face and this face, but not all of them. Whoops, yeah, so shade auto smooth. And remember where you could add objects before? Well, you can do that in the edit, have an edit mode, and you can do the same thing. I can add in a UV sphere, but now instead of that sphere being its own separate object in the hierarchy, it is now part of this entire mesh, right? So say I want to only select the faces on the sphere. It would be very inefficient for me to just select like that. And I want to select, if I try to select all the faces, you see it selects all the faces on here and all the faces on here, where I only want to select all the faces on the sphere. So there's a couple ways that you can go about this problem. One of them is by something I forgot to mention, is that you can use the gizmos here to do the same thing as the middle mouse buttons that I showed you at the beginning. And You can see that this one, you can go into a side view. You see the shortcut for that is numpad 1. And you can also use the other numpad keys. Numpad 1 is side view, numpad 3 is front on view, numpad 7 is top down view, and if you press 9, it will invert whatever view you have. So you can keep pressing 9 just to flip it around to the other side. So there's actually an X-ray view. So, because if I take this and I can drag to box select, or I can press C to circle select by using left click, as you can see down here, it's either shift left click to deselect, or you can hold down the middle mouse button to deselect. I can do it there, and then I can go around and select the other side, or there's a better thing. And also remember, we can press A to select everything. You can press Alt A to deselect everything. So now that I have everything deselected, I want to select this again, but with one action, right? I want to be the most efficient possible. So you can go into wireframe mode, and by default, it enables the X-ray. So if I have the X-ray enabled, then I can simply select all of those faces with one giant box select. And if I press numpad period to go and orbit around it, which is always good to check that you make sure you made the right selection, well then, now I can ensure that I did. And there's another way that I can select that without having to even do all the work of going into wireframe mode. And it's called L. No, wait. It's Control L. It's Control L is to select all the faces, select all linked. So this selects all the faces that are linked to this mesh, and that's very important. It's not a single object because both of these two meshes are one object. So the mesh is just a collection of vertices, edges, and faces, but an object is an actual separate object in the hierarchy. It's a very important distinction. An object can be any of these things, where only this, remember, one object can be considered a mesh, and it has the mesh icon to match. So, you can press Control L to select all the linked, and you can press Shift, Control L to select those linked, and you can click on this one again, and press Shift L to deselect all of those. So, now remember, you can do all of these different selections to, well, select different things. So if I want to select to browse, sorry, you can browse this menu to find all of the different things you can select. If you want to select a ring of edges, well, you can hold down Alt, and then you will select an edge ring, and this works on any model. So if I can press Alt to select this edge ring, and again, I can do anything I want with that edge ring, as you can see, or I can select a face ring. So, and sometimes it may not, okay, yeah, so it's actually important where you click on the face, because if I click on the center of the face, it thinks that I'm doing the ring that's wrapped around this. It looks almost kind of like a finger, right? But I want it to wrap around this way. So instead, I have to make very certain that I select Alt and it's on the edge of one of those. Yeah, it's on one of these edges. So it's very important which edges you select will determine, for face select, will determine where it or how it actually wraps around that model. There's something called topology, which you would get into in more intermediate studies of 3D modeling, and that's essentially how different combinations of polygons and make up model. There's something called good topology, there's bad topology, but that goes beyond the scope of this video. And so I hope you found this somewhat helpful. Again, this was only a more to gauge what I think people want before making a better tutorial. Maybe I'll do it. Maybe I'll make a better tutorial. Maybe I won't. I did this unscripted because I don't want to make unscripted tutorials on my YouTube, but I figure it's fine for me to make them for patrons. You can leave the comments if you thought it was helpful, if you thought that there was anything else that I should focus on in just the basic installing, navigating, and then basics of 3D modeling part of the video. I'll make another video very soon, which covers textures and materials. And let's be real, you're probably watching that after it came out already. So go and watch that video if you want to learn about textures, materials, and UVs in Blender. And I'll leave a link down in the description for a tutorial that covers how to export your models from Blender into Unity. And hopefully with this tutorial, you'll have the knowledge to go into more intermediate tutorials that expect that you already know these kinds of things. Or if you already knew some of this, I hope that you learned something that you haven't already. Again, please leave feedback in the comments. It would be very helpful. And go watch my other tutorials, like the one I've probably already done on materials, UVs, and textures by the time you've watched this. Thank you so much to my patrons for supporting me so much, and till next time. As you can tell, I originally made this tutorial for my Patreon. I was hoping to get feedback I could use to eventually create a more refined, fully scripted tutorial that I have not made and I'm unsure if I will make. It's been a year since I made this tutorial, and I figured it could be useful to many people. So I edited out the mistakes, and it's now available to the public. I put some previews of a couple of my other Patreon videos on YouTube, and have gotten some dislikes, and even a few negative and inconsiderate comments, though mostly likes. I understand why some are upset, but my Patreon is honestly what has given me the motivation to keep making as many tutorials as I have. One every month for the past year and a half. Dozens of hours go into making these videos, even the unscripted ones, but especially the ones where I write a comprehensive script. It feels like I'm crafting a curriculum. An unbelievable amount of time goes into learning the techniques themselves, scouring the documentation and other educational resources, then drafting an outline of what information I feel is the most important to teach and how best to present it. I then write a script and make many revisions to it. I refine it again and again. Then I do a couple practice runs of the tutorial before recording it. After I record it, I edit the video, which is honestly my least favorite part because it's so tedious. But personally, I feel that all the time and effort is deserving of some compensation. I have hours of free, more basic tutorials on YouTube, and if people want to level up their skills, then they can view the more intermediate tutorials I made not only for my Patreon, but because of my Patreon, because I probably wouldn't have made most of them otherwise. That's where part 2 of this series currently sits. Will I ever bring that video to YouTube? Yeah, maybe. I might bring some other ones over too. The reason I made my bakery tutorial the first one on there is not only because the tool desperately needed a comprehensive video tutorial, but also because bakery is a paid add-on. I feel it makes sense that if people could afford the add-on and the real-time preview I also recommend, then they would also be able to afford the paid tutorial. In an ideal world, most educational resources would be free, but I, like everyone, have expenses, and Patreon gives me the motivation to spend my limited free time making educational content that clearly helped a lot of people. There are so many other things I could do with my time, including working a job that pays way more than my Patreon does. But I take a lot of pride in the tutorials I make, and they're clearly appreciated enough by others for people to keep supporting me. So again, to all my patrons who have supported me, thank you.